بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم نحمده ونصلي على رسوله الكريم. Inshallah, in this period, we will be doing a book called Qatr-un-Nada wa Ballu-Sada. What's the book called? Qatr-un-Nada wa Ballu-Sada. It is written by Abu Muhammad Abdullah Jamaluddin ibn Hisham al-Ansari. And explain all this shortly. As usual, before we do any book, we need to know a few preliminaries, a few introductory matters regarding the book. So you get a better idea regarding the book, the author, the structure of the book, the style of the book, etc. So first of all, the author. The long name we had there, that's his name. But the way he's known as Ibn Hisham al-Ansari. That's when you say Ibn Hisham in Nahu, everybody knows what you're talking about. So if you're talking about language, Arabic language, you say Ibn Hisham, it means him. That's his name, Ibn Hisham. Most people probably don't even remember what his first name is. But his name is Abdullah. His name is Abdullah. He may have had a son called Muhammad. So then he's his kunya. It's called the kunya. A name where you label somebody father of, or son of, or daughter of. So his name was Abdullah. And his name was Abu Muhammad. Kunya. He was called Abu Muhammad. And then as a title, he was called Jamaluddin. What was he called? Jamaluddin ibn Yusuf. Jamaluddin, that's his title. What's that? His title. Son of Yusuf, son of Ahmad, son of Abdullah, son of Ibn Hisham al-Ansari al-Misri. Yes, and Misr, because he was from Misr. Al-Ansari, because his lineage goes back to the Ansar. So Al-Ansari and Al-Misri, he grew up in Egypt. Misr, Egypt. Yes? So his period is also important to know which period somebody is in, which era they lived in. For example, so you know, like somebody, you read a book of fiqh, you know, well, was in the first century of Hijri, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, because you know, well, let's say for example, somebody writes in the 8th century or 12th century of Hijri is a book. But you know, well, in those times, common was travel. There wasn't really globalization, but people would interact more. The Islam had spread more to maybe even Spain. So you know where he grew up, that will influence what he's written. So you know a lot. If a scholar was in the earlier centuries, you know, well, it's a different way he looked at things. Different things influenced him. Later years, he had access to the previous books. A previous earlier scholar, maybe the initiator of the science, or person who first lays the fundamentals of the science. So all of these things are important to know. Later, obviously, we're not studying it like all that critique, we're just understanding the book, but it's good to know for future reference when you're studying in more detail. So he was in 700 Hijri, passed away in 761, 1360, so 14th century he lived, 600 years ago. And you know, when you do work and Allah accepts, 600 years have gone by, he didn't upload his book to archive, or he didn't put it on the internet or make a PDF, he wrote it somewhere in Misr, and his book has survived the test of time. 600 years have gone, and the book is still around and people are still using it. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us all of us the ability to do some kind of work which effects remain for a very long time. Okay. But Ibn Khaldun, just to understand who he is, Ibn Khaldun is a historian. Right? He's a historian. And obviously he documents different things. So he says regarding Ibn Hisham, that when we were in Morocco, and in Morocco, we used to hear, because obviously it's not YouTube, we can't just stream it live, but we used to hear from people and that. There's a scholar in Misr, in Egypt, he knows Arabic. And people say his Arabic is even better than Saybuy's Arabic. Now Saybuy, he is the father of Arabic. So Saybuy, he was studying Hadith, and he made a few mistakes in reading Hadith. He got really embarrassed. He thought, I don't even know Arabic properly. And then he went full into Arabic, and he codified the Arabic. So Arabic always existed. But what he done was that he codified it, he got poems, and he used evidences how the Arabs spoke and their literature and their texts, and he kind of codified the language. He's the first person to actually codify. So his book is called Al-Kitab. So when you say Al-Kitab in Nahu, it means Imam Saybuy's book. So Saybuy is a Persian, he's not even an Arab, he's Persian. Okay, so Sayb means apple, and Way is the end of it, Saybuy. That's a Persian name. So why that reason, I don't know why he's called Saybuy, but that's his name. So he was in maybe 2nd century, yeah. But 1,000 years later, People were saying, you know what, Ibn Hisham, his Arabic is even better than the Arabic of Sayyid, or on the same level. That's how high praise they had for him. So this is one of his small little booklets. So he's got some other books. We can go through it here. So what I was saying is, Qatr-un-Nada wa Ballu-Sada. This is the book that we're studying. Now what happens classically, what they used to do with their style was, they would write brief texts or brief poems. And it was easy to memorize or easy to read through. And then they would put footnotes or it's called marginalia, I think. Like basically notes in a margin, okay? Or make a commentary to explain the brief text. So you read the brief text, you know what it means, you know the concepts, it's easy. And then the commentary the teacher gives it, or you read it yourself. But you just focus on the text. So what we have here, so you seldom get this. You have Qatr-un-Nada wa Ballu-Sada. That's a main text. But whenever you buy this, it usually comes, once it's a hardback book, more than 10 pages or 20 pages, it's going to have the sharah with it. And it's the sharah. So he himself wrote both. He wrote a small text with all the main rules in that text. And then he wrote a commentary to explain his own text with all the extra details. So you can refer back to it. Do you understand that structure? Does everyone understand what's happening here? So when you have a main text, this main text is called the matnun. Matnun. Or some people call it the asl. The aslun. And this is called the sharhun, the commentary. And sharh literally means to cut open. So to dissect something, to cut it open and analyze it in detail. That's called the sharh. Do you understand? So the matn is the Qatr-un-Nada wa Ballu-Sada. The text itself is about 20 pages or 30 pages. But the sharh is hundreds of pages, like 300-400 pages. Because it has an explanation. And that's how the classical style of books work. You have a short matan, either in poem or in prose, and then somebody commentates on it and gives you an explanation. You memorize and learn the text or the poem, and you got the basics. Did you understand? So this is one of his main books. And then he got another book in Arabic. It's similar to this one. It's similar structure. It's called Shuduru Dhahab fi Ma'rifati Kalam al-Arab. Pieces of gold or nuggets of gold in understanding the Arab Kalam. Okay, it's also a good book, but the structure of this book is easier, and he doesn't digress as much in this first book. That's what we're doing. And he's also written a sharah. So you've got a matn, a brief text, and he's also got the commentary with it as well. Understood? Yes, you following? And then he's got a very detailed book. Yes? He's got a very detailed book called Awdahul Masalik ila Alfiyat ibn Malik. Maybe sometimes everybody specializes in Nahwu because this book is quite a good book, but it's very detailed. So this is one of the very detailed books in Nahwu. And he's got another book called Nuqtul Al-I'rab and Qawaid Al-I'rab. We do this in the morning. Maybe you can do it in the evening sometime, Wallahu Alam. And another book is got very useful called Mughni Al-Labib and Kutub Al-Agharib. Very, very good book. So this book, the Mughni Al-Labib, and the one before that, Awdahul Masalik. If you study those two, then inshallah you should be able to master the Arabic language. Correct? Everybody with me so far? Yes, you following? Any questions? No? Okay. Now the book itself. What's the book called? Qatr-un-Nada wa Ballu-Sada. Qatrun literally means a drop or raindrops. So Qatrun. An-Nada, so Nadan, because of Alif Lam, so it becomes An-Nada. Means what? Dew. And dew is what? The moisture that develops. You know, when you come up for Fajr Salah in the morning, you see that moisture, even if it's not rain, especially if you go to like equatorial countries, you can see easily the grass is wet. That's a dew. It's not raining, but you can see that moisture. That's called dew. So Qatr-un-Nada, drops of dew. So Qatr-un-Nada. And Bal is moistening. And Sada, severe thirst or aridity, meaning severe thirst. And moistening the severe thirst. So this book is basically drops of dew. Basically, there's lots of dew, lots of large nahwa. So much. There's only a few drops. But at the same time, it's Ballu Sada. All of your students, you have a never-ending quest for knowledge of Arabic language. This will moisten your sada, your thirst. So Qatr-un-Nada, from the ocean of knowledge is the Qatr. But it's enough to bal your sada, to moisten your thirst. See the name? How you play around the name? Yes? Yes, enjoy? Yes, Muhammad, Abdullah, you following? Okay. As I always say, when you start studying Arabic books, or any book, even if in English, it is a very good idea to just browse through it first, if it's a normal book, and especially any book. I keep on saying this over and over again. I might sound like a broken recorder, but it's very important. Look at the table of contents. So I think many of you got the sharah. So if you see at the end, it should be a table of contents. Remember that in English books, table of contents usually comes at the beginning. In Arabic books, a table of contents usually come at the end. So the table of contents come at the end. So if you look at it, analyze it, I've summarized it here. And he said he's got fasl in his kitab. If you look at the table of contents, it probably has something called fasl. So fasl means section. So he's divided his entire book into sections. But what I've done, I've tried to say, well, let's break, so he's got about 30-something fasl, 30-something sections. What I've tried to do is say, well, let's separate them into a bit more categories. So what happens, in this first 8, on a whole, generally, he discusses words individually. For example, a kalima, fa'il, harf, kalam, types of i'rab, nakira and ma'rifah. Then the second section, he discusses jumla ismiya, mubtada khabar and nawasikh. Nawasikh means anything you add to a jumla ismiya. Kana, inna, la li nafil jins. He discusses that. Then from fasl number 10 to fasl number 18, he discusses jumla fa'liya more or less. Even though tamyiz and mustasna can come in jumla ismiya as well. Generally from 10 to 17, these are all what? Jumla fa'liya. Then after that, he has the majrurat, mudaf ilay and majrur, shibul fa'il and tawabi. It's kind of almost like phrases. It's not definite like that, but it's kind of, you can say, kind of he discusses phrases, possessive phrase and adjective phrase, etc. Now at the end, he's got a few miscellaneous rules up to 26. He discusses numbers, he discusses ghayr munsarif, he discusses ta'ajjub, he discusses waqf, how to stop when you're reading, how do you stop? Rasmul harf, how to write some letters, and hamzatul wasl. How do you recite Hamzul Wasl? So a few mutafarriqat. Do you understand? So this is the whole structure of the book. So fasl number 1 to fasl 26. The 26th fasl. And I've subdivided them and I've said, we can roughly say that the first 7 are mufrad, individual words on a whole. There are a few like jumlas, etc. But the main discussions from 1 to 7 are discussing mufrad and words on their own. The second 2 fasl are regarding murakkab, a compilation, sentences. But what kind of sentence? Jumla ismiya. And then from 10 to 17 is jumla fa'liya. And then you have murakkab naqis, incomplete sentence, phrases. And you have mutafarriqat, a few various rules, varying rules. This is the structure of the book. And this is how he's laid out the book on a whole. And this is how you can say, you can kind of summarize the book. And this is how you have. And what you need to do is keep this in your mind. So when you start studying, sometimes, as I said to you before, I said over and over again, imagine if you're going to go hiking. Any of you been hiking or camping or anywhere?
Principles of religion. Yeah.
What do you do? Have you planned out your map? What do you use to plan out your map? Bird's eye view, didn't you? Google. So when you have a bird's eye view, you know, when you go into that camp or when you go into that trekking area, you say, oh yeah, I know where we are, because you've looked at it from a bird's eye view. So it's very important to have a bird's eye view of the book. So when you start like delving into it, you know where you are. When you start turning the pages, like, where are we? When you see hal, it's like, where are we? Like, it's a bush. It's like in front of you is blue, behind of you is blue, it's all around you is hal, hal, hal. So where am I in the book? What am I talking about? So you have a better idea that we're in this part of the book, we talked about jumla fa'liya. You can find masail, you can find the rules. If you get stuck in another book about hal, you can come back to hal. But you know where hal is. You know the hal is discussed in section, the thirdish part. So these are not his, this is my bid'ah. I added this in just to make it easy for you to get a rough guideline. This is his numbers that people have added in. But this top part is what I've kind of tried to make it easier for you to understand. Do you understand? Is everybody with me? G?
He says here, the concept of bid'ah, what is bid'ah?
Mm-hmm.
He says, kullu amrin, every matter, people do.
Yeah, but it is kind of nahwa, it's grammar. So the question is waqf and rasmul harf, how to stop when you're reading and how to write letters. It does come under, it doesn't have to do with i'rab, but it is a rule of grammar. That's why he has mentioned it. Yeah. Any other questions?
In any form of it.
No questions? Okay. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك ونشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت ونستغفرك ونتوب إليك.